offended. I'll be honored because you've been empowered to take back your power, and that would please me, because that's the nature of my work as a monastic, to empower clients, take back their power, and honor their truth. And I know the downside to that is that I can be in your face, and I'm very aware of that. I'm very aware that sometimes when Jesus, Gaia, Magdalena, and my master speak their truth, they usually say, speak the words we give you. And the words that were given sometimes hurt us more than they do the recipient. But we mustn't get embroiled, must we, in what other people are thinking or saying, or how they respond. Because the journey, as you know, Nancy, and Tom, and Polly and Sheila, it's a journey of love. This journey that you and I are on is one of unconditional love. And there are days when you really feel, trust me, you're banging into a wall, a brick wall, and you feel the price of discipleship. And what I want to do now is to just apologize profoundly that Angel Rose can't join us. But if you're willing to stay, then I ask you to pray with me, to pray for me, so that I share what I'm given, and that I come to you as an open book, with no agenda. I'm not here to convert you. And the purpose of the live webinars is for us to be seen in our vulnerability. It's for us to be truthful to our heart. And if we say we're in service to the Supreme, then we mustn't feel ashamed or embarrassed. Because you know, I believe that in my fragility, in my vulnerability, God uses that to touch my life, and I hope yours too. I welcome those of you who've joined but not logged in, because your presence here today is as important as mine. I'm in service. I'm not a guru. I'm not a teacher. I'm like you. I'm in service to love. I'm in service to the cosmic Christ, as a bride of Christ. And for those of you who are not Christian, that might sound pretty kinky. It's not, because as a young monk, I was ordained as a bride of Christ. Okay, I didn't wear a veil like the nuns, but we had the same ceremony, and it was a ceremony of consecration, where our heart was consecrated to God. We were slaves to love. So where did my journey begin? Well, I guess it began in Scotland, where my mother was finishing her degree and met a handsome young man, the Earl Flynn lookalike, and the voice of Mario Lanza, who was Irish, but who joined the British Air Force. And he was on leave with his friends in Glasgow, having a great time. And of course he met my mum, because she was working in Uncle Huey's ice cream parlour, because my genealogy has Romani and Italian gypsy in my blood. That'll probably account for the fact why I'm so batty, and probably so whatever. But my mum and dad met, they fell in love, but he couldn't tell his mother. because she was from the aristocracy in Ireland. Her family were big churchgoers of the Irish Anglican Church, the Church of Ireland. They were not Catholic, but they were very wealthy and very influential. And they owned best part of Nina in Tipperary. How wonderful. And her great uncle was the Archbishop of Ireland. And I guess probably in my blood, that's why I've always had such a love for interfaith, interspirituality, and inner faith. And I guess that's the reason why I've never prayed for vocations to the Catholic Church. That's not because I'm anti-Catholic. I am a Catholic Christian who embraces all faiths. So it's in my blood. It's in my blood. But when Daddy married my mum in Glasgow, his mother didn't know. And just as well, because she would have gone ballistic. Because she lived in a huge house, and Sheila will know this, on the Fisborough Road. And in those days, to live in Fisborough, you had to be a somebody of influence. And Grandmother Bradley was a beautiful Christian lady, very stoic, and she always had a fur with foxes, and it frightened the life out of me. But she was a devout lady who lived a simple life, but she had the entourage of a maid, a cook, and a chauffeur. But when she married my father, when her son married, my dad married my mom in Glasgow, and she found out, she was not happy. But when my grandmother married a Catholic, she was disinherited. She was disinherited from the family and lost her title, Lady somebody or other. And she had to start off small. So she was denounced and moved to Dublin. And she got a flat and then got a house. And in that house, not far from Bolton Street, where Sheila will know the College of Technology, my grandmother kept 6 pigs. 6 pigs. And she grew the family business from her parlour. Can you imagine? 5 sons and 6 pigs. The aroma of Chanel must have been fabulous, or as Sister Joy would say, terrible. Terrible. But you know, today, I guess we are so lucky because our upbringing has an influence on us. And whilst I had a great love for my posh granny who lived in Fisborough, I never ever felt comfortable with her, because you had to be invited in to see her in this huge parlour with chandeliers and Waterford crystal. It was all very much over the top, but she was used to that. And she educated all her 5 sons. And the family business was very successful in Dorset Street, where they provided all the top hotels with the best quality pork. Yeah. And from that beginning, from that wonderful beginning, I had a respect for my granny, but I found the maid very threatening. And once every 3 months, we would be invited to go with her to Lawler's, the hotel in Naas. And in those days it was very grand, because it was all the horse set, Kildare. Sister Joy will know this from her daughter keeping horses, Christina, that Kildare, the Curragh, was the place. It was where all the thoroughbreds came from. Well, my grandmother mixed with a lot of that, what I'd call the Hooray Henrys. And from that simple beginning, humble beginning, I was introduced to a different way of life. But do you know something? I loved my Glaswegian granny from the Gorbals because she was down to earth. She taught me all I know about values and principles. And every May, because my granny brought me up with my sister Eileen, we were estranged from all my other brothers and sisters, thank God. But she always had this May altar of Our Lady of Fatima with all the beautiful flowers and candles. Well, that came to an abrupt end when her brother died, because she was praying for a miracle and it never happened. So out went Our Lady, out went the flowers, out went with her devotion. And although she was a devout Catholic Christian, she never really allowed herself to get too close to God. She was afraid. She was afraid of being punished for putting the statue of Our Lady in the bin. Funny really, but that's reality. But that grandmother from Glasgow was a suffragette for women in Glasgow. She was one of the first women in Scotland who drove the biggest cranes you could imagine on the Govan docks. She was a suffragette. And all her brothers played for Celtic. And a lot of her family had ice cream parlours on Suckyhole Street. And I guess you're right, Tom, why I have such a love for ice cream. But I remember as a young boy growing up in Dublin, where I have lovely, lovely memories. My grandmother, not my posh grandmother, because she was into the cocktail parties and mixing with the hoi polloi, but my grandmother from Glasgow, she had 2 banana boxes either side of her little coal fire in a small little lounge, come dining room. And she had 50 chicks in each box. She had a market garden. She was self-sufficient. And she had a hen run. And I've always had a love of hens, but I haven't got a love of killing them like she had. And she was a super little cook. But she said something to me as a young man when I told her about going into the monastery. She said, remember this, I'll give you 6 months. And I went, what? Why 6 months? She said, because you won't stick it. And don't let them destroy you, because I know the games they play. Because my best friend became a nun, and they destroyed her. And when she left, she ended up in a psychiatric hospital. So I guess my grandmother, because I was her first grandson, and I loved her. But she always said to me, be nice to people on the way up on the ladder of success. Because there will come a time when one of those rungs will slip and you'll fall down. And that's when you will need your friends. Do you know, I'm 63 now, and I was told that when I was 10 years old, 53 years ago, and to this day, it's like the 11th commandment. As us Christians, we have the 10 commandments of God, and the Catholics have another 6, so that's 16. And then there's that one from my grandmother. And of all of them, that's the one that has inspired me to hold on to what I've been given. Always be kind and selfless to people on the way up. Because when you hit bad times, that's when you will need your friends. I would like to stop now, and I would like to play something for you which I heard about 12 years ago, which I've used in my work in nearly every country in the world where God led me. And when I was asked by Magdalena and Jesus in 2000, they guided me to be their hands and feet, I never felt good enough. I never felt worthy enough. I guess I was full of Catholic guilt. And I had it drummed into me, I guess, from my novice master when I entered the monastery in 1966, June 66. And I remember him saying to all of us as young postulants and novices, he who leaves the religious life is like one who puts his hand to the plough and is not worthy of the kingdom of God. And it was that caused me to become very ill when I was forced out of religious life, not for what my brother has alleged on this scam on the internet, because I slept with the monks. I've never even seen a monk naked, not alone sleep with them, because the life was so strict and it was so unhealthy. When I look back, it was obsessed about sex, that you couldn't look at the opposite sex. That's why I have a permanent stoop in my neck, because we had to walk with our head down and our hands hid behind the scapula. We were never allowed to look at you in the eye, especially if you were a woman, for fear of being led into sin. That is so tragic. But I guess all of that had an imprint when 6 of us decided we'd had enough of being treated like slaves. When we would come home from the hospital hungry, as young monks, ordained monks in Manchester, when we would do a double shift as part of our nurse training to graduate as a state registered nurse, we would be up at 5 in the morning in chapel. We would be on the wards at the hospital for 7:30. And a double shift meant that you were free from 2 o'clock to 4:30. So we would go and finish our prayers and find somewhere in the School of Nursing where we could put our head down for an hour. And then we would be on duty till 9:30 that night. And by the time we go back to the monastery, it was 10 o'clock. And by the time we went to the refectory to get something to eat, it was always locked. Because one of the brothers who wasn't a nursing monk was very envious of the 6 of us. And we literally nearly starved. But this went on for 18 months. And we tried to address it, but we were dismissed as being foolish, silly, imperfect. We should offer it up as a penance for God. But we were hungry. And we were very confused and we were very lonely. And some of the other monks decided they'd had enough. They couldn't cope with the inhumanity and the lack of Christian love. So I did not want to leave, because I knew in my heart I belonged to Christ. Even now. And when I had to make the decision not to take my vows for life in 1974, I realized that I was being guided on health grounds to leave. That broke my heart. It broke my heart because the monastery bought me a suit because I had no money. I had my dowry returned, but isn't it funny? I just had my tax return, my rebate as a student nurse the week before I left. I could have had £1,000 in my hand, but the monastery kept it, which is right, and they gave me enough to live on for 2 weeks. And they made sure I had 3 pairs of underpants, 3 pairs of socks, 2 shirts, a vest, and a suit. And that was it. We were taken by the monastery car to the nursing home, at the hospital, and left there. And that was an experience, because you know, the young male nurses and the female nurses were not chanting the divine praises to God. They were up all night screaming, partying, having fun. And I think I was about 23 then, and I found it really hard. Because I'd been in the monastery 8 years. I found it very difficult. I missed the silence. I missed the prayer life. I missed it when we came for Mass, for communion. I missed the exposition more than anything. where I could sit in the presence of Christ and just ask him to touch me. But you know, through all of those black times and 12 years in therapy to try and overcome the guilt that saddled my heart, that I would go to hell for turning my back on my beloved Lord, for daring to leave my vocation, that I would be punished forever. That became an obsession, as it did with some of the other young monks who left, but I think it affected me more profoundly because I think I was too sensitive for my own good. And I was in therapy for 12 years to try and overcome that guilt and that I was loved as a child of God. And many years later, through a mental breakdown, when my best pal of 28 years, we were monks together, we laughed, we cried, we screamed together, we did lots of silly things in the monastery, like breaking the grand silence and getting punished for it, giggling in the dormitory in the grand silence. He'd put his hand under his arm. That's Eddie, who's 16 years dead on the 26th of this month. And it's like yesterday. And that's why I have such a love for Brother Tom, because Tom reminds me so much of my best pal. But Eddie used to put his hand and cup it under his armpit and make the most rudest noises. And this is in the grand silence in the dormitory. Well, we were in hysterics. And then, of course, the novice master, who had ears almost strapped to the door, would come in, and then we would have to kneel on the floor. But you know, God has a plan. And through my breakdown and my ego being compromised and crucified, I began to see things in a clearer light of day. I began to realize that God is not a God of hate, but a God of love. And I remember being at the Jesuit retreat house in North Wales, where I lived from 87 to 1997. I went and I met this wonderful priest and I heard him sing. And I cried. I shed tears because the chapel was like the Bedouin tent in Egypt. It was done with the most beautiful hessian in the shape of a big canopy. And the backdrop to the Blessed Sacrament was a collage of trees painted on the most beautiful fabric. And the lighting was all concealed, so you felt that you'd come into a Bedouin tent. And that's where I have the love of the Bedouin tent. And this is what I heard him sing. And this is what touched my heart and empowered me to come back on the road to seek monasticism, but not sure how. Please allow me play it for you. You've heard it before, but this was Jesus speaking to my heart.